Am Sonntag verbreitete sich die Meldung wie ein Lauffeuer. US-Präsident Joe Biden hat der Ukraine die Freigabe gegeben, russische Ziele mit Langstreckenraketen anzugreifen. Der ukrainische Präsident Wladimir Selenskyj drohte prompt in Richtung Moskau. Die Raketen werden sprechen. Nun gibt es erste Berichte über einen ukrainischen Angriff mit Attackams-Raketen auf das russische Mutterland. Welche Auswirkungen kann der Einsatz von Attackams mit einer Reichweite von 300 Kilometern auf das Kriegsgeschehen haben? Ist es ein entscheidender Wendepunkt, wie der litauische Präsident Gitanas Nausėda behauptet?
The Attackams missile by itself is not a game changer. Indeed, this attack that took place, and this is not an attack reported by the Ukrainians or the Americans, it's an attack reported by the Russians. The Russian government says that Ukraine fired 6 Attackams missiles against a military facility in the Bryansk region. So it's not hypothetical. This has happened. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that if the Attackams missiles is used to attack Russia, that means that the United States is at war with Russia. So let's be very clear about what happened today. The United States attacked Russia. And we need to reiterate that one more time. The United States attacked Russia. Now, the question is, what will happen? You see, this is political in nature. This has changed the entire dynamic of the conflict. It is no longer Russia against Ukraine backed by the collective West. This is Russia against the United States, soon to be against France, soon to be against Great Britain. And if Germany wants to join the queue and provide the Taurus missile, soon to be against Germany. We're at a tipping point. Up until now, NATO has been saying that Russia is bluffing, that Russia will not do anything. That's what NATO was betting on. You see, NATO has 2 months to turn this war around, to present the president-elect Donald Trump with a fait accompli, that this conflict will go on, that this conflict is worth supporting. The Attackams missile attack against Russia, if Russia does nothing, will lead to immediate escalation by NATO. NATO will be prepared to do several things. 1, put troops on the ground in Ukraine. 2, to expand air defense coverage out of Poland into Ukraine to start shooting down Russian missiles from NATO territory. 3, backing that up with NATO overflights of Western Ukraine. And they will continue until Ukraine is a de facto member of NATO. This is Zelensky's victory plan. Now, normally people would reject this victory plan as a recipe for a third world war. But this all depends on what Russia does. Russia has promised a decisive response. If Russia fails to deliver a decisive response, then I believe NATO will continue to press forward. And at what point in time does Russia decide enough is enough? Or maybe Russia doesn't want to escalate. Maybe Russia was bluffing all along. We will find out. This is the moment. This is the tipping point. If Russia yields now, NATO will sense weakness. They have 2 months now to turn Ukraine into a NATO member, and they will do everything in their power to do this. Understanding that as they escalate, they increase the stakes. Right now, a Russian retaliation could be simply holding Ukraine accountable for this action. But if NATO seeks to exploit perceived Russian weakness and put NATO troops on the ground, then we are looking at a Russian-NATO conflict. If Russia bluffs, backs down, then NATO wins. But if Russia calls NATO's actions, we are looking at a third world war that will go nuclear. This is a very, very dangerous situation. And the ball is in Russia's court. And to be honest, there's no easy solution. This is, but Vladimir Putin brought this on himself. He made a statement on September 12th that was unequivocal. It said that any use of Attackams missiles on Russian territory will be seen as an attack by the United States on Russian territory. That has happened. I'm not making this up. This isn't analysis. This is a statement of fact. The United States attacked Russia. What is Russia going to do about it? And that we don't know. The Russians seem to be waiting for some sort of official statement by the United States. But again, the United States has cleverly used Russia's insistence on legal formalities against Russia. There is no official statement coming out of the United States. It just happened because the United States believes Russia is bluffing, that Russia will do nothing. And if Russia does nothing, I can guarantee you NATO is waiting to jump in and do what is necessary to fortify Ukraine as a NATO member, a de facto NATO member, before Donald Trump becomes president. And the question now then is, what will Russia do about this? I mean, is NATO correct? Russia is bluffing that the negotiations will lead to a freeze of the line of contact, that Russia will be forced to negotiate from a position of weakness where in order to get Kursk back, they have to give away territories. I mean, Russia has said no up until now, and up until now, Russia has been believable. But if Russia doesn't do anything in response to America attacking Russia, then Russia is not believable, and NATO will exploit that.
Lass uns über den Zeitpunkt der politischen Entscheidung der US-Regierung sprechen. Die Ukraine fordert seit Monaten die Freigabe für Angriffe auf Russland mit westlichen Langstreckenraketen. Warum hat Biden diese Freigabe jetzt zu diesem Zeitpunkt erteilt? Siehst du einen Zusammenhang zwischen der Eskalationspolitik der Biden-Regierung und der nahenden Amtsübergabe an Trump am 20. Januar? Soll damit jede mögliche Friedensinitiative von Trump ausgehebelt werden?
This is 100% political on the part of the United States. Had Kamala Harris won the election, then a Harris administration would be expected to continue the policies of the Biden administration when it comes to Ukraine. And they could be looking long term. There would be no need for precipitous action early on. But not only did Kamala Harris not win, but she was defeated by Donald Trump decisively. Donald Trump believes that he has a mandate for change. And one of the changes that Donald Trump seeks to implement is not only an end to the conflict in Ukraine, but perhaps a redefinition of America's relationship with NATO. The Biden administration is panicked by this. They have 2 months to make it very difficult for Trump to implement his policy. And one of the ways they're going to do that is try to push to get Ukraine to be a member of NATO, whether it's de jure or de facto, doesn't matter. If NATO troops are on the ground in Ukraine securing Ukraine's sovereignty, then Ukraine is a member of NATO. NATO has effectively extended Article 5 protection to Ukraine. That's the direction the Biden administration and NATO are heading right now. This would not have happened had Kamala Harris won the election. But because she lost, because they are desperate, because they recognize that Donald Trump will fundamentally change everything, as any desperate person does, they will go to extremes. And this is an extreme response, all predicated on the fact that NATO and the United States believes Russia is bluffing, that they're calling Russia's bluff. And if Russia does nothing, they are going to continue to escalate so that Donald Trump is unable to implement the plans that he has for Ukraine, for Russia, for NATO, for Europe, for the world.
Als Reaktion auf die US-Eskalation ratifizierte der russische Präsident Wladimir Putin die neue russische Nukleardoktrin. Kreml-Sprecher Dmitri Peskov ermahnte die NATO, die neue Nukleardoktrin genau zu studieren. Sie zielt darauf ab, dem potenziellen Feind die Unvermeidbarkeit von Vergeltungsmaßnahmen im Falle einer Aggression gegen die russische Föderation und/oder ihre Verbündeten bewusst zu machen. Wie ist deine Sicht auf die neue russische Nukleardoktrin? Ist sie tatsächlich eine Antwort auf die NATO-Aggression, wie Russland behauptet, und verschärft sie die Gefahr eines Atomkriegs?
Right now it's just words, empty words. Yay, congratulations, Vladimir Putin. You signed yet another document that means nothing. That's what NATO thinks. That's what the United States thinks. You're huffing and you're puffing, but you can't blow the house down. You're weak. You have no intention of following through. This is what NATO has been saying all along, because Russia has yielded every single time on red line after red line after red line after red line. And if Russia yields on this, then there is no nuclear deterrence, because NATO will believe that Russia is an empty suit full of empty promises. And if Russia's not, this leads to the threat of real nuclear war, because NATO will accelerate its initiatives in Ukraine to the point where Russia will feel it has to implement a doctrine that NATO believes Russia will never implement. Russia needs to back up its words with actions. Russia has been attacked by the United States. What more do you need to know? I'm not saying that Russia needs to use nuclear weapons, but the Russian response needs to be decisive and immediate. If it's not, then Russia's just bluffing. And if you believe Russia's bluffing on Ukraine, then you must believe, too, that Russia's bluffing on its nuclear doctrine. Meaningless words on a piece of paper that stands for nothing. This is the reality. Perceptions create their own reality. Russia may say, well, we're not bluffing. It doesn't matter what Russia says. If the perception in the West is that Russia is bluffing, because Russia said that an attack by ATACMS missiles fired by Ukraine on Russia would be an attack by the United States, and the United States would be a party to the conflict. If it turns out now that that's not true, that Russia is not treating the United States as a party to the conflict, that emboldens France to give Ukraine permission to use the Scout missile. It emboldens England to give Ukraine permission to use the Storm Shadow. It gives Germany emboldened to send the Taurus missile in. And if that happens without response, then they'll send troops into Ukraine because they'll believe that Russia is bluffing. They'll send airplanes in. And next thing you know, Russia's goal of keeping Ukraine out of NATO is finished because Ukraine will be a de facto NATO member. And Russia will have sacrificed for 2.5 years for nothing. So this is where we're at right now. Perceptions create their own reality. And right now, the reality that's being created by the perception of Russian weakness is that Ukraine will be this is Zelensky's victory plan playing out. Everybody mocked Zelensky's victory plan, saying that Russia would never allow it to happen. Well, apparently Russia's allowing it to happen by doing nothing in the face of an American attack on Russian soil.
In diesem geopolitischen Spiel, in dem Russland, wie du sagst, schwach zu sein scheint, würdest du sagen, dass die NATO nach dem ukrainischen Angriff mit den von den USA bereitgestellten ATACMS nun die Oberhand hat? War das ein spielverändernder, ein kriegsverändernder Zug?
If Russia does nothing, this is a game changer. This will change the game. It doesn't mean that Russia loses. It means the world loses, because I don't believe Russia's bluffing. I do believe that Russia is very pragmatic, even phlegmatic, slow. You know, the old saying that Russia is, slow to harness but quick to ride. We don't want Russia harnessed. But what Russia has to understand is that its hesitation only empowers NATO, empowers the West, and it will change the game. Game changing doesn't mean that you win the game. It means you have changed the game. In American football, you could start the first half with a running plan where you're going to run the ball. And then you come to halftime and you say, well, that's not working. We're going to change the game by going to a passing attack. It doesn't mean you win the game. It just means you change the game. NATO is now changing the game. They are implementing Zelensky's victory plan. And believe me, if it's left untended, they will provide Ukraine with even newer weapons that reach deeper into Russia. It is a game changer. It doesn't mean that NATO wins. It doesn't mean Ukraine wins. But the game has fundamentally changed if Russia doesn't nip it in the bud right now.
Die US-Freigabe löste innerhalb der NATO unterschiedliche Reaktionen aus. Die baltischen Staaten frohlocken, Großbritannien und die Niederlande sehen sich bestätigt. Sie haben ihre Freigabe für Langstreckenangriffe auf Russland schon vor Wochen gegeben. Ungarn und die Slowakei reagierten mit Ablehnung, das war zu erwarten. Aber auch Italien machte deutlich, dass es eine Freigabe nicht geben werde. Frankreich zögert ebenfalls. Lassen sich in dieser Frage deutliche Risse innerhalb der NATO erkennen? In deiner Argumentation? Warten die NATO-Staaten alle jetzt darauf, wie die russische Reaktion ausfallen wird?
I mean, there are some rifts in NATO, but I will tell you what, that if Russia does nothing, Hungary and Slovakia will be isolated, and they eventually will be compelled to yield. This literally empowers NATO. NATO was fundamentally fractured. If Russia had stood up, and if Russia does stand up, NATO resilience and resolve will collapse. But right now, NATO is getting a free ride. They talked tough. The United States took action. NATO did not take action. The United States took action. And NATO is now claiming victory. Perceptions create their own reality. The perception of Russian weakness now has emboldened NATO. And again, all this will do is cause NATO to believe that they can get away with the next escalation and the next escalation until we, either have a defeated Russia because Russia was bluffing all along, or we have the Third World War. that's the direction we're heading.
Liebe Zuschauer, wenn euch unsere Beiträge gefallen, teilt sie unbedingt in den sozialen Medien. Abonniert unseren Kanal und drückt auf die Glocke, damit ihr keine Veröffentlichung von Gegenpol verpasst.